And to me, the role of the financial planner really changes as well. Uh, I used to think when I was studying for my CFP, I used to think that, okay, I'm going to get this knowledge, and then my job is to bestow this knowledge upon my clients, and they'll be so grateful. I'm going to share all this neat, complicated stuff that I'm learning and improve their financial life, and they'll be so grateful. And I learned very on, clients don't really care. They just want to feel comfortable. They want to feel secure. And I realized I'm going to need more than just technical knowledge to succeed with my clients and to really help them. And so,
welcome to the Future Ready Advisor podcast. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, wealth management consultant and behavioral scientist. Join me and my guests, from industry experts to top advisors, as we explore the pain points that financial advisors face, how they can solve them, free up their time, and make their practice future ready. Hi everyone, I'm Sam Sivarajan. Welcome to today's episode of the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm here with Andy Baxley, a fee-only financial planner who's here to talk about the role of purpose and planning in providing meaningful financial advice. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Let me introduce you to our audience, Andy. Andy is a financial planner and works at the intersection of wealth and purpose. He is based in Chicago. The work he does with clients is comprehensive, covering life planning, transition planning, retirement income strategies, investing, cash flow, estate and legacy, asset protection, philanthropy, tax strategy, and so much more. Andy, once again, welcome to the show. I'd love it if you can share with us a little bit about your practice and your philosophy. It is a bit different than many that I see in the industry, and it fascinates me. Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. And I suppose it's a good place to start is to talk about what I used to do, which, I started with some large financial institutions in my career. And when I did that, I was made to believe early on that, financial advice was asset management, basically. And maybe you'd advise on a thing or two outside of that, but certainly you never talk about taxes. Certainly you don't spend too much time talking to the person about their life or their hopes or their dreams or their fears. You really just kind of focus on managing the assets. And eventually I found my way over to comprehensive fee-only financial planning, and specifically fee-only financial life planning. So I work now and have for the past 3 years with a firm called the Planning Center. We've got offices in a few different locations throughout the states. And, I think there's a couple of things to mention about the Planning Center. One is we're comprehensive in nature, so we cover not just the investment management, but if it's got a dollar related to it, we talk about it. So whether that's tax or Social Security claiming strategies or what have you, we pretty much cover anything that might be related to one's financial life, and also a bunch of things that maybe are not as obviously related to one's financial life. So I think that's where the financial life planning component comes in. So, for me, when I think about financial life planning, I think of it really as a movement within our industry to put the person or the people you're working with ahead of their money in its most simplest form. So often with larger firms and when we're coming up in the industry, we're taught to focus on the money itself, and the person behind the money is really just sort of is tangential, but not the main show. I think with financial life planning, it really inverses that and focuses on the person before their money and redefines wealth not so much as having a lot of money, but as having purpose in your life and having meaning in your life. And when you think of it in those terms, I think money becomes a tool to meet those goals, and that's going to look different for everyone. But ultimately, I think life planning is all about seeing money as a tool for helping people to live the best possible version of their lives. And to me, the role of the financial planner really changes as well. I used to think when I was studying for my CFP, I used to think that, okay, I'm going to get this knowledge, and then my job is to bestow this knowledge upon my clients, and they'll be so grateful. I'm going to share all this neat, complicated stuff that I'm learning and improve their financial life, and they'll be so grateful. And I learned very on, clients don't really care. They just want to feel comfortable. They want to feel secure. And I realized I'm going to need more than just technical knowledge to succeed with my clients and to really help them. And so the other thing for me that financial life planning is all about is it creates space for the financial planner to become an asker of thoughtful questions and a facilitator of great conversations, rather than this person who's coming from on high with all of this knowledge to bestow upon their clients.
I think that's a fascinating approach, and it's one that resonates with me. I think, particularly in the world of AI and other technologies that are coming in, I think the asking of these deep questions that may or may not have an answer, and then being a person or being a service that puts the client at the center of it. And when I say the client, the holistically, not just the financial side of it, but the whole person at the center of it, I think is something that is, I think, the future of the industry, and one that is going to resonate both with end clients, but also I think differentiate financial advisors, planners in the way that they approach the practice. And I think just expanding on a comment that you made, I came across a post that you did, Andy, that I really liked. And it was about creating what you called a statement of financial purpose for your clients. I found that very interesting concept, and it's along the lines of what you talked about as your philosophy. But can you talk a little bit about what that is, how you use it with your clients, and how do they react when they see something like this? Because I have to imagine this is fairly new to them.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. I will talk about that, and it's fascinating that you mentioned AI. I think that's one of the most important conversations we can be having in our industry right now is there's the temptation, I think, when you see a powerful tool like ChatGPT or any of the other AI tools, there's a temptation to bury one's head in the sand and pretend like it's not happening, but it is happening, and it's going to change our industry. I think the question is not if, it's how, right? How it will change our industry, and it sounds like we're aligned in our thinking. And my thinking is that we're going to have to become more human as financial planners. We're going to really have to focus on that side. We have to focus on the one thing we can do that AI will never be able to do, which is engage in a true human to human, heart to heart conversation. And so this exercise that you asked about, glad you asked about it, the statement of financial purpose, this exercise is one that I'm really passionate about, and I've been trying it with clients over the last year or so. So essentially the idea behind it, again, you'll hear me talk about why a lot in my practice. The idea behind the statement of financial purpose is to essentially put a why behind your money. So the way it works is I start clients with a master list of values. So different values like honesty, integrity, autonomy, creativity, so on and so forth. So that's where I begin, and I show them this list of, it's got about 75 different values on it that one might hold. And I start and I just ask them to pick any that resonate. So I don't limit them at all at first. I ask them to pick any that resonate. They'll usually pick 15 or 20. And I'm creating that list. And then I show them the list of 15 or 20, and I say, okay, now you got to choose 5. So you chose 15 to 20. Now I want you to pick the 5 that are most essential. Having done so, I then ask them to rank them. So then they've given me their 5 most key fundamental values. They've ranked them in order from most fundamental to least, although they're all going to be pretty important at that point. And then once we've done that, I ask them to craft a statement of financial purpose. So that can sound like have many different forms. I figured I would share mine to give an example. So one way to start the statement of financial purpose is with the prompt, the purpose of money in my life is to blank. So my personal statement of financial purpose is the purpose of money in my life is to enable opportunities for personal growth, deepen my connection to the people I love, and to create an environment for my children to thrive and learn. And so I encourage clients to come up with similar statements like that in their own lives. And what that becomes is sort of a North Star that they can aim for. So when these difficult decisions come up around what kind of car should we purchase, where should we live, when should we retire, where should we retire, these are the types of questions that I think can really use some higher level purposeful guidance. And that North Star, if you have that to aim for, it really can clarify those things. And then finally, once that statement of financial purpose is created, I then ask clients to write down how they plan to live that purpose in the next 1, 5, and 10 years. So it's one thing to draft the statement of financial purpose, then put it in a drawer somewhere and never look at it. This is where the rubber meets the road. I ask them to say, okay, in the next year, how am I actually going to live that purpose? How am I going to make sure that my decisions align with those values and that purpose that I've outlined? And then similarly, over a 5 and 10 year time horizon as well. And I don't hold them to it necessarily. I don't make them stick to those exact commitments, but I think making the commitments can be helpful, and it gives us something, a landmark to revisit every now and again to make sure that they're staying on track.
And are you revisiting it? Like when you are, I guess, having an annual review, etc., is this something that is referred to by you and your clients to say, this is your purpose or how you defined your purpose a year ago, 5 years ago? Is this still valid? Is there anything changed? Do you feel that this is consistent in your thinking or your decision making? Is that something that you're doing with your clients?
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, I should be honest, it will be. As of now, I've just started doing this statement of financial purpose exercise over the last year or so, so I actually haven't come upon the opportunity to review it, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about how do we incorporate this in an ongoing basis, not just as a one-time exercise? Because if you just do it once, it's very likely that you'll forget about it. So I think part of the role of the financial advisor is not simply to review their finances, but to review what they said was important to them, to review their why, that statement of financial purpose. And so I do intend to pull it out on two separate occasions. One would just be annually, to focus on it maybe in an annual review meeting and discuss and see what's changed. But also, I have a document that I create for all of my client notes, and at the very top of it, I have the statement of financial purpose on that document that they've told me. And so the other time I might pull that statement out would be if they have a decision, like I said, and they say, hey, I've decided I want to get the new Tesla Model Y. We've decided that's really important to us. And it very, very well may be very important, but it also might just be a shiny object that has captured their attention temporarily. Those are good examples of times where it might be really helpful to pull out that statement of financial purpose and say, okay, well, you told me the purpose of money in your life is to enable opportunities for personal growth, deepen your connections to the people you love, and create an environment for your children to thrive and learn. Just talk to me a little bit about how this new Tesla Model Y fits into that. And I'm not trying to corner them, right? But I am trying to make them think critically about, is this something, this is a big decision, is this something that we truly want? Is this something that's truly important? Or just something that's captured our attention temporarily?
Look, that totally resonates with me. It reminds me of a comment that Clayton Christensen made in his book, How Will You Measure Your Life? And he talks about having a framework for making decisions. So he was a deeply religious man, and he was playing basketball in a playoff game in the UK. And one of the games was on Sunday. And despite all of the pressure from his coach and from his teammates, he actually didn't play that Sunday game because he tested that desire to play that game against this kind of statement of life purpose that he had, which was that he wasn't going to work or play on Sundays. And I think what you're doing, I think, is an interesting manifestation on bringing this into financial and investment decisions, a framework or a philosophy on which to kind of test decisions or choices that you want to make. So I can totally see that resonating.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, Sam. And I think what it also does is it focuses one's energy. I find that if we're focused, if we don't have a focus for our energy, whether it be the energy behind our financial decision making or just our broader life decisions or our career decisions, if we don't have a focus, our attention and our energy just gets kind of dispersed and we lose our power in that way. But when we can really focus on what's truly important and make it something that we revisit on a regular basis, when we do that, I think the chances of us actually seeing that through and bringing that to fruition are much higher.
I think focus is bang on. So I know this is early days that you're doing this. It's a year and a half or so. What's your client's reaction been to this? Is this brand new? Are you having to help them through this because it's a more philosophical or esoteric type of discussion than they might have been used to?
Well, for better or worse, my clients are used to me asking them about stuff like this in my practice, so it won't feel that unusual to them. I will say, I sort of piloted it with the clients who I really knew might enjoy something like this, and sure enough, they did. It didn't go necessarily perfectly smoothly the first couple of times, but I piloted it with clients who were nice and forgiving, and interested in exploring the process. And really, my clients helped me to co-create the process and think about what this would look like. They gave me feedback along the way, saying, "Hey, this was great. This other part wasn't so great. Maybe you should change this." And I was really grateful for that. So I haven't had any negative feedback yet. What I find with clients is that, and people in general, they don't get asked questions like this very often. They're not asked to reflect on their values and to craft statements of purpose around their values. It's just not a conversation that's had, but I think it's one that's desperately needed often. And so far, clients have been really grateful for the opportunity. And what's been interesting, when I've done it with couples, it's a really interesting opportunity for couples to hear from each other what's important and hear what each other's values are. And often maybe 80% of the time, one couple will say, "Hey, here are my 5 values," and the other couple will say, "Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That sounds about right." But then sometimes one will come out of nowhere for the partner, and they'll say, "Wow, I learned something about you that I didn't know. This feels really fundamental to you. How do we make sure that we're designing our lives together in a way that reflects that value?" So it can be very illuminating in that sense.
No, I think to me the point that you made, that you're having this deeper conversation that perhaps they've not had, that doesn't surprise me. And the fact that I've seen risk tolerance questionnaires between couples being different, their attitudes towards risk being different, so I can totally see that the values or the priorities that you're diving into with your statement of financial purpose, it's a conversation that in many cases, even if they're on the same page, it's probably a conversation that they've not had in so many terms without this exercise. And I loved your concept of co-creating. I'm a big believer that when we talked at the outset about the human side of financial planning or financial advice, the future of this being, I think there are two components that your practice is illustrating that I'm a big believer is a differentiator. One is that deep discovery and the type of questions that you're asking about purpose, values, the guiding North Star, if you will, I think is a critical component and a differentiator. The other one is this idea of co-creation. I truly have believed, and there's a lot of behavioral research, it's called the IKEA effect, that you value a shelf that you put together of IKEA, that because of the effort, worth more to you after you put it together than it was when you bought it. And I think this
Hmm.
finding or insight, I think, applies to our business, that the more that you can involve your client in designing the portfolio or the plan, the more likely that they're going to buy into it and stay committed to it going forward.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And I love that you brought up the IKEA effect, because when I think about our industry, I almost think there's this myth that clients are hiring us because all they want to do is delegate. They just want to delegate everything to us. They want to give us every single thing to do so they don't have to think about this stuff at all. I think that's too blunt of an observation. I don't really think that hits the mark. I think for most clients, they do want to delegate the things they don't enjoy, like the day-to-day management of certain technical things. But that's not to say they don't want to think deeply about this stuff and have an opportunity to have bigger, broader conversations about their lives. They don't want to delegate that. They don't want you choosing their goals for them and saying, "Well, most folks want to retire at 66 and typically want to replace this percentage of their income. And yeah, you'll probably want to pay for your kids or your grandkids to go to college. So yeah, here's this list of goals I've created for you. Let's move on." Right? They don't want to delegate that part. They really want somebody, a skilled facilitator, to have conversations about those goals and uncover what they really are.
I think facilitating is the perfect word for it. It is to bring your experience and expertise, to ask the right questions, to perhaps provide suggestions and recommendations, but together, collaboratively, co creating a solution, whether that's a budget, whether that's a financial plan, whether that's a portfolio. I think that that co creation to me is more likely to meet the needs of the client, but is more likely to engage them and have them committed to the outcome that you've co-created, as opposed to you kind of creating a solution in the back room and then handing it to them over the table.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'll add that while we're all here with the question primarily, how do we make our clients' lives better? I think it's also at least worth mentioning, many of us are business owners or work for businesses, and we're very focused on retention. How do we keep clients around for a long time, ideally? Well, I have not encountered a better way to create a sticky client who wants to stay with you over the years than having these conversations. Because if you've had these conversations, I think it very much increases client loyalty, and it even allows, I can think of an example of a client where we'd had some great conversations, and a small error was made on the administrative side on their accounts. We got it fixed right away. It wasn't a problem at all, but an error had been made, and that was the kind of thing that might have annoyed a client more. But the fact that we've had these conversations, it almost buys you some social capital. And they say, well, we can forgive these small things here and there. It's really not a big deal at all. The much more important thing is that we're having these big, deep conversations and that we're designing our lives effectively. Whereas if all you ever do is the small administrative stuff and you're not focused on those conversations, well, if you mess up the small administrative stuff, that can actually be pretty detrimental. And that's what they end up focusing on.
100%, Andy. I think that it's the deeper questions that when you're asking them and they're exploring them with or without an answer, it is fundamental to building the trust between you and the client that I think is critical for long-term relationships. I think it gets you then the free pass, if you will, or the bit of forgiveness on the small clerical or admin errors that are going to happen no matter how great your practice is. But I think it's the glue that holds the relationship together is the bigger picture, fundamental, philosophical, deeper questions that you can ask that shows that what you said at the outset, it shows that you as a practitioner are viewing your client as a whole client and not just somebody that is paying you money to provide solutions to them. So this has been a bit of a philosophical conversation. Let's get into a bit more philosophical and a bit more policy oriented. So we're living longer after retirement than we did perhaps 40 years ago. Today, the average North American can plan on living 20 years after retiring at 65. Now, funding your retirement over this retirement period is one thing. And let's be honest, not enough people are set for that. But what I find perhaps even more interesting is that almost no one is talking about what to do with one's time in retirement. We all spent 40 plus hours a week for 30 plus years at work. That was our social network. That was our intellectual stimulation, our purpose, no matter what we thought of it, no matter how much we complained about it. Are people thinking about how to fill their weeks in retirement? Suddenly you go from being busy 40 hours a week to having nothing in your calendar. How are you approaching these types of more esoteric questions with your clients?
Yeah, it's such an important question. I think so often people get so fixated on what they're retiring from that they fail to ask that question of what they're retiring to. What are you moving towards? And unfortunately, well, fortunately, actually, I would say that deeply felt human need for connection and purpose and contribution and community, those things don't just magically go away in retirement. There's the sort of cliche retiree who thinks they can golf all day every day and be content doing that. And I don't think that person really exists. I think even the most avid golfers know that there's probably more to it than that. But I do think it gets at an important truth, which is that when you're working, you get often things from work that go far beyond just a paycheck. You often get friendships, you get a sense of purpose, you get an opportunity to contribute, your opinion matters. And if you retire all at once, that can really kind of get stripped away. And you end up feeling, well, I've got all this free time. I don't really know what to fill it with, and I have these deep human needs that need to be met that I didn't even realize were being met by work because I had never really thought about that. I wish I could say that I didn't see that very often. It's the norm, I would say. I see it far more often than I see the opposite, which is that somebody's thought deeply about these things. I think people really underestimate what work is providing for them in a lot of cases, even if they don't like their jobs. Then that's an important point. It's even if you don't love your job and you're excited to retire, it's still maybe providing benefits beyond just the paycheck that you haven't fully accounted for. So as with anything in our financial lives, I think it really just requires careful planning. And one activity that I've given to clients that I think is kind of fun and can be illuminating and perhaps a little stressful is just giving them a blank weekly calendar that breaks the days down by hour. So 8 a.m., 9 a.m., all the way through the evening. And I just ask them to fill it out. write out for me what an ideal week in retirement looks like. What do you do? When do you go to the grocery store? When do you go play golf if that's what you're into? What do you do in the evenings? Who are you spending your time with? And what almost always happens is that they come back and they say, "Gosh, I just can't fill this entire thing. I don't know what else to put. I put here I have my round of golf 3 times a week or whatever it may be, dinner with friends a couple nights a week. What about all these other hours?" And I give that activity not to overwhelm people or make them think, "Oh my gosh, I'm making a big mistake by retiring here," but to help them start thinking really expansively about how they might spend their time. And then that's when we can start to come up with some creative ideas for how they might spend their time and where they might fill those gaps. I find with clients it's much better to think about this starting maybe 5 years out than it is to start thinking about the day you retire. If you think about it the day you retire, that can be a challenge because then you'll have a few really hard months, I think, making that transition. So this to me is part of the retirement planning process and an essential part at that.
Look, I totally agree. And I think it's reason I asked the question is I think it's more and more relevant to people, but it's not yet, at least I'm not seeing it feature as prominently in conversations or the thinking of investors or clients. It's not in the public press that this discussion, like there's lots that you read about being able to fund your retirement lifestyle, but not what exactly you're going to be doing. And I think to your point, having this conversation and discussions ahead of time, I think is critical so that you can start planning, building your social networks outside of work, or finding a way that the social network that you have through work can exist post retirement, or investing in different hobbies that you think that you might be able to do for 10, 20, 30 years after retirement. As you say, golfing may be something that you aspire to when you have money right now, but no time. But it may not be something that you want to do 5 days a week, 6 months of the year when you're in retirement.
Yeah, no, I think that that's exactly right. And I think about my just on a personal side, I think about my own parents going into retirement, and my dad and my mom are sort of starkly contrasted when it comes to their retirement lives. So my dad, when he retired, he was sort of that stereotypical guy who hadn't really he'd focused so much on his career and his family, he hadn't really thought much about hobbies. And he really struggled, I think, in the first 2 years of retirement. I mean, it's not that it was totally without joy. He found lots of opportunities for joy, but he had a really hard time those first 2 years in retirement, and his cognition declined quite precipitously. I would say in those first 5 or 6 years of retirement. He's since passed, but I often wonder if he had thought more about that. If the cognitive decline was probably coming no matter what, but I wonder if he might have gotten a few more good years out of his mind if he had had more of a focus on how he was going to fill his time, because a lot of it just ended up getting filled with kind of sitting around watching TV because he just wasn't sure what to do with himself. My mom, on the other hand, who's still with us, hi mom, if you're listening, she's really, I think, kind of approached it in the opposite way. She's had this personal renaissance in retirement where she had all these hobbies lined up that she wanted to try, pottery, painting, and that's evolved into all these other hobbies as she's made friends who are involved with those things as well. And so on any given day, she's either, on a trip in Europe with her friends, or doing an art project, or teaching somebody else how to do an art project, or sharing her art. I mean, it's really incredible to see. I think she's living in some ways one of the best chapters of her life from a personal fulfillment standpoint. So I'm really proud of her, and it's not to say I wasn't proud of my dad too. I just think my dad was really the product of this culture we live in, which asks us to focus so exclusively on work and family that self care, especially for men of that generation, I think, and those more expanded interests just don't get focused on as much.
Look, thank you for sharing that. That's deeply insightful and personal, and I think your observations are bang on. It resonates with a lot of the research that's coming out, that talking about the importance of social interaction for our mental and cognitive health. And I think particularly for men of our parents' generation, but I think for our generation as well, is that men are probably less, and I'm generalizing here, are probably less good at maintaining or keeping those kind of friendships and social interactions. And I think one of the findings that I read recently is that most married men can probably count, they're lucky if they can count on 3 friendships that exist outside of their marriage, etc. And this is, I think this is worrisome, not just for the current satisfaction of life and joy, as you put it, but I think it becomes even more accentuated when you're in retirement and you don't have that time fill that you have with the career and commute and everything else that is a pain right now, but is actually kind of occupying your time. And people have not thought about how they're going to replace that time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One thing that I'm really quite passionate about in the realm of retirement planning are these sort of alternative timelines that one might consider. So typically, you hear sort of this 9 to 5 till 65 or maybe 67 narrative where it's just, you work your 40 hours a week or more in a lot of cases, and you do that till you're 65 or 66, and if you save diligently, you just then quit. You stop working and you're retired. It's like flipping a switch. One thing that I think really helps to alleviate some of these challenges we've been talking about is experimenting with more creative timelines. So that could be anything from, what about a year sabbatical in your 50s, in your early 50s? What about trying retirement out? I almost think of it like going into the dressing room and trying retirement on for size. See what it feels like. What's it like feeling that year? That can be really eye-opening to have a year sabbatical. Not without its challenges, taking a break from your career, but it's doable for some people. Or what about a phased retirement? I love the idea of a phased retirement where maybe you don't go from 40 hours a week to 0. Maybe you go from 40 to 30. Maybe you stop working Fridays for a few years, and then you stop working Thursdays and Fridays, and then you kind of slowly phase into it. Again, that's not going to be available to everyone with every employer, but if it is, then I find that it's something that really gives you the opportunity to not dive into the deep end so much as just dip your toes in and see how it goes, and it gives you an opportunity to practice retirement because at the end of the day, I think retirement is a skill, and it's one that none of us ever has to do until we're asked to do it, right? And then we get there often totally unprepared, but if you can phase into it, I think that gives us an opportunity to feel a little bit more prepared when the day does come to fully stop working.
Yeah, there's an academic who's in the longevity space that I remember. I love his line. It's like we should stop approaching retirement as coming to the edge of a cliff and start thinking about it as an off ramp. And I think that's along the lines of what you're saying. And yes, not every person has that possibility or flexibility with their employer or with their work. Although, if we're not having the conversation, I think we're never going to get there. And I think that perhaps with some of the labor shortages that we're seeing, perhaps this is the time that we're reimagining what the future of work looks like and the future of retirement looks like. And I think it's type of work that you're doing, Andy, and the conversations that you're having, I think that are so important to having this kind of dialogue become more regular and more commonplace than perhaps it's happening right now.
Yeah, and you bring up such a good point, which is that, well, first of all, you don't know unless you ask your employer if they'd be open to something like that. And in this current labor environment where companies are struggling to find qualified folks and often budgets are tight, well, being nudged to consider having somebody who clearly is well trained, knows what they're doing, and isn't going to be as expensive because they're not working full time anymore. It's not necessarily something that your employer is proactively going to come up with as an idea, but I've noticed that when folks just give their employer a nudge and say, hey, just so you know, I'd be open to this. I don't need to just retire 100%. I'd be glad to work half time or three-quarters time for a while. I find, especially again, like you said, in this environment, that employers are probably more open to it than most people might think.
Awesome, Andy. We can continue for another half an hour, I'm sure, but we are coming to the end of our podcast. And so I have a few final rapid fire questions for you if you're ready. So, number one, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
It's a big question. I think, and it's hard to answer such a question without resorting to cliches, and I'm afraid I'll confess that I might have to do the same, but I think the lesson is be kind and generous, and if I can add to that, just assume the best of people. You you just never really know what somebody is going through in their life. That's something that I learned very on. Somebody can seem like they really have it together and that everything's just going perfectly for them, and then you find out that their parent has cancer, or that they are having marital difficulties. And so, to me, the answer is always just be kind, be generous, assume that people are always going to be doing their best and that they want the best for you, even when they're not putting their best foot forward.
So true, and such a good reminder. Of course, it's hard to do that in the moment, but I think it's something that progress, not perfection. I think it's a good reminder for all of us. So thank you for that, Andy. Number two, finish this sentence. I wish I had known.
Yeah, this I would say I'd finish that sentence by I wish I had known how eager people are to help you. When I was just starting out as a planner, I was a career changer. I started as a teacher. When I was a career changer and started in planning, I was always so nervous to ask people for help or for advice in the industry. I was like, well, why would they want to talk to me? I don't. What do I know, right? I don't think that they're going to want to help me or give me any of their time. Now that I'm midway into my career, I'm fortunate enough that I have younger folks coming to me and asking for career advice and other types of advice, and it just absolutely honors me and tickles me when they do. I love those conversations. It's often one of the best parts of my week. And so I just wish I had known when I was younger. People are eager to help you, and they're not just doing something for you, you're doing something for them by asking them for their help. People love to share their experience and the lessons they've learned, and so do people that favor no matter what phase of life you're in. If you're in your 20s, ask people in their 30s or beyond. But even if you're in your 50s and you want to figure out what's it going to be like to retire, well, ask somebody who's retired to share their experience. They will love doing that, I think, 9 times out of 10 or more.
That's great. Last, number three, what do you think is the biggest pain point for most advisors, and what advice would you give them?
Well, I have to imagine for a lot of advisors, it's going to be client acquisition. It's going to be bringing new clients on board. And we get so focused on our marketing strategy and outreach to potential new clients, and that stuff's really important. But what I found is that often referrals are the best source of client acquisition. And to me, going back to this conversation we've been having today, I think when you slow down and really go deep with the clients you already have and extend the conversations beyond just the money, that is really the type of thing that leads to referrals. It's when a client can sit back and say, wow, this person knows me. In some ways, they know me better than anyone knows me. And that's always interesting when people say that. I've heard that a few times, and they're like, I've never talked with a friend about this. My friends don't ask me about this stuff. It's impolite to ask about money. You know me better than anybody in some regards. And when you have those conversations, who do you think is the first person that's going to come to mind if they have a friend or a family member mention that they have financial questions? So I think that human-centered approach, in some ways, is the best business growth opportunity there is. And how great is that? Because it's also just fun, and it's the right way to behave as a human, to ask great questions and be interested in people. It's more fun, and it makes other people feel good. So it's a win-win all around.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there is a false belief that investing, if you will, in this kind of deep discovery or asking these kind of questions is a lot of time that you're putting into one particular client situation, and that it's going to cost you in terms of time and in terms of your overall business. But I think exactly your experience, I think that that investment pays off in spades in making you the trusted advisor to the client, giving you an opportunity to get a greater share of wallet, giving you an opportunity to ask for and receive high quality referrals without doing much effort.
Exactly. I had a mentor tell me once, find the areas in your life where you need to slow down to speed up. And this is one of those areas to me. If you slow down and you have those more in-depth conversations, that actually speeds up business growth. It doesn't put a hindrance on business growth. It doesn't put a hindrance on your practice. It speeds it up actually, but you have to know when to slow down. You have to recognize those opportunities, and these big conversations like the ones we've been talking about today are, I think, exactly an example of that.
That's a wonderful piece of advice from your mentor, Andy. Look, this has been really fun, really insightful, with lots of good stuff to take away. If our listeners want to learn more about you or find out about your work, where do they go?
Yeah, there's a couple places, and before I mention what they are, I just want to say thank you, Sam, for your time and for inviting me to be part of the conversation. I really enjoyed it. I love these conversations. So if folks want to find me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can just search Andy Baxley on LinkedIn, and you should find me. I'm based in Chicago, in case you get a few different search results there. The other would be theplanningscenter.com. You can learn more about the work we do. If you click on the Who We Are link, you should see a picture of me that you can click on to learn more about me, as well as my other thoughtful colleagues. So yeah, thank you, Sam, for your time. It was great talking with you today.
And thank you, Andy. This was an interesting conversation with Andy Baxley. Let me recap and provide some perspective. First, the shift from asset management to financial life planning. Andy discussed his transition from working with large financial institutions that primarily focused on asset management to fee-only comprehensive financial life planning. This shift highlights the changing perspective in the industry, where the emphasis is on addressing a client's entire financial life, including aspects like taxes, Social Security, and personal goals, rather than solely managing assets. I think this transition applies to all advisors, fee-only financial planners to financial advisors in general. Competing against AI means that the advisor has to focus on the entire human being on the other side of the table, beyond the money to be managed, to a person whose dreams and fears need to be addressed. Second, financial life planning focuses on the person. Andy emphasized that financial life planning prioritizes the individual's goals, dreams, and fears ahead of their money. It aims to redefine wealth as having purpose and meaning in one's life, with money serving as a tool to achieve those goals. This approach contrasts with the traditional focus on the money itself, rather than the person behind it. Again, I agree that this is the future of the industry. As Simon Sinek said, start with why. Digging deeper not only ensures that the advisor knows what truly matters to the client, but it helps the advisor build a deeper and more trusted relationship. Third, planning for retirement requires thoughtful consideration. Andy discussed the importance of thoughtful retirement planning, emphasizing the need to think beyond the financial aspects. He encouraged individuals to consider alternative retirement timelines, such as phased retirement or sabbaticals, to help ease the transition into retirement and make it a more fulfilling experience. We're living longer and longer, and that means we need to be thoughtful and purposeful of how we want to spend our retirement years. Sure, we need to plan to save enough to fund our retirement, but what exactly are we funding? What will we be doing in retirement that keeps us mentally and physically healthy, engaged, and fulfilled? Thank you for listening to this episode of The Future Ready Advisor. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast, and if you could rate it while you're at it, I would appreciate it. Visit samsivarajan.com, where you can download a behavioral coaching guide and find other resources. Join me in the next episode for more tips and tools to make your practice future ready.